So, hello everybody. My name's Graham. Hello. Hi, Graham. I'm a senior tech lead manager at Airbnb on the client engineering team. It's been absolutely wonderful seeing all your lovely faces again in real life. So thank you to Patrick and the rest of the Maxis admin team for bringing us all together again after so long apart. Yeah. I am one of the co-founders of London Apple Admins. I am on the board for Mac Admins Open Source. And I am also a testicular cancer survivor and a Movember fundraiser. So here's the serious bit. Testicular cancer is the most common form of cancer in young men. So common, in fact, I've been contacted by 2 people this year in our community who are going through their own battle with the disease. So the Mac admin community isn't very big, okay? We all see each other at all these conferences every year. So that goes to show how common it is. And honestly, cutting off someone's testicle isn't really a cure. It's pretty medieval. The only way we're going to find a cure for this is by funding research and awareness campaigns. So gents, please check yourself. Not here, but later, please. And if you find this talk useful in any way, please consider donating. Right, so today, we are talking about planning your zero trust strategy. Right, here we go. Wordy slide. The US government defines zero trust as authenticate, monitor, validate user identities and trustworthiness, identify, monitor, and manage devices and other endpoints on networks, control, manage, and access data flows within networks, secure and accredit application in the technology stack, automate security monitoring, connect tools across information systems, analyze user behavior and other data to reserve real-time events and proactive orient network defenses, and support IPv4 and IPv6. Right, so look at that wall of text, right? It's huge. And I'm going to be honest here, it says nothing. So if you're basing your zero trust strategy off these bullets, good luck. You probably have no idea where to start. So here we are. Somebody, maybe even you, has decided you need to do zero trust. So before I get into how I think these things should be created, let's take a quick look at a couple of ways to plan your zero trust strategy that I think will probably end in disaster. So if you have a less than mature security team, they might just buy a zero trust product and leave it at that. You know, one of those VPN replacement things that promises access only by managed devices, which usually just means it's been enrolled in your MDM once in the last 100 years, or some sort of conditional access product that you can hook into your identity provider. And yeah, that might get you closer to zero trust, but it should only form a small part of your zero trust strategy. If it were so simple that we could just buy a product and call it a day, I would have a much easier job, and you lot would not be sitting here listening to me now. So if you have a better security team, they're going to spend months writing this zero trust strategy in secret and eventually present you a Bible-sized document outlining every single minute detail of your organization's zero trust strategy. And then they're going to turn around and tell you the bits they need you to do. So there are a couple of ways that I've seen this done poorly before. So I guess we should crack on with how I think this should be done. But before we do carry on, let's tackle the elephant in the room. I imagine more than 0 of you will be sitting there wondering why this person who leads a client engineering team is standing here talking to you about how to plan a zero trust strategy. A good zero trust strategy needs input from many teams. If it's solely being run by your security organization, then you will not get an effective strategy. So your first step is to think about your major stakeholders. You're going to need representation from your security teams, obviously, probably your client engineering or CPE team, whatever you call them, and maybe your identity team, maybe your network team. You need enough people to get a good idea of your future needs, but don't invite the whole world. You don't need so many people that you're paralyzed and cannot make any decisions. You can always bring in more people if you need to. So I've been one of those stakeholders. I've been the person who said to the security team, wait, we need more people to be involved here, so don't be afraid to be that person. So we went over that wonderful official definition of what zero trust is, and yeah, it's very long-winded, and it doesn't really say a lot. And honestly, zero trust is a pretty simple concept. So I would love to take credit for this, but it was my manager that came up with it. So we were chatting one day in our one-on-one, trying to come up with a simple way to describe what zero trust is to people who don't really know what it is we're trying to do. So he pulled up a pad of paper with this written on it. And it was like a light bulb came on. This was it. So the first part of the equation is the device. And I don't just mean approved managed devices. It is any device with some level of trust applied to it. The device might well be a fully managed, organizationally owned laptop that's fully patched with the latest macOS and has all your security tooling running perfectly. Or it could be a 10-year-old Android that got its last security update in 2015 and is riddled with malware. It is everything we know about the device, the good and the bad. Right, next up, we're looking at the user. Who's the user? What groups are they in? Did they authenticate using modern MFA like a security key or a passkey? Are they using passwordless? Did they use biometrics? All those sorts of things about the user. So the context that the request is made in is what separates an okay zero-trust solution from the great ones, in my opinion. The context you care about are up to you. Perhaps you do not want users making requests from certain countries. So the context you care about there is the location the request was made in. Perhaps the data classification matters to you. Maybe you have different policies for PII versus publicly available data. Context changes constantly, and a good strategy will not only account for those changes, but they're going to embrace those changes to make good security decisions. So finally, we've got the policy. We're going to take the sum of the device state, the user identity, and the context the request was made in, and we're going to compare it against our policy. So your policy is probably going to be something along the lines of, the user must be in one of these groups using a device with this level of trust and meet these contextual requirements. So if the combination of device, user, and context satisfies our policy, for that particular resource, access is going to be granted. So I'm talking through that. It begins to sound to me like we're kind of starting to talk about user stories. So a user story is when we say, as some sort of person, I want to do this thing so I get some benefit or desired outcome. User stories allow us to talk about features or actions that people need to take and justify why we think we should care about them. The purpose is to put ourselves in the shoes of our most important customers, and that's our users. If your users aren't happy with the solution you provide, they're probably just going to work around your tools and shadow IT, let's face it. So first off, we have the who. So try to be as specific as you can be here. Like, saying just as a human being doesn't really tell you anything about who cares about the feature you're describing. So perhaps you could say, as a user who works in the accounting department, or as a contractor. So next up we have the what. What's it they're trying to do? Maybe it's access resources off the corporate network easily, or maybe it's know what version of macOS is acceptable according to your patch policy. So then we have the why. The why, I think, is the most important part of a user story. It's why we think users want to perform the action. And as such, you can use it as a rough prioritization guide when you're planning what work you can do. All right, so when we're talking about the who in user stories, you might find it helpful to focus on a few specific user personas. Your organization might already have some of these personas defined. So if they do, just use them. If you don't, try and think of like 3 or 4 different types of people. Outline what they do for a job, what tools they use, where are they physically located. Ideally, you're going to be covering a large cross-section of your user base. So for our personas, we outline what they do for a job, what tech stack they use, where they are, what internal and third-party tools they use, and what their abilities are. So are they technical? And if they are faced with a minor problem, they can work around it? Or are they good at their job, but not skilled in a traditionally sort of techie way? So these are the 3 people we use as persona internally. So we've got a full-time employee who is a back-end engineer, and he uses Android. We have a contingent worker who's a designer and makes better choices and uses iOS. We have a customer support agent, and they're going to be using Chrome OS in our organization. So for our purposes, we also wanted to capture zero-trust user stories for service-to-service communication. So it's not user-facing, so probably technically not a user story, but there we go. But it's definitely a use case we needed to capture. Because if we're not trusting anything on our network, we're still going to have services running in various clouds and SaaS and all these things that need to talk to each other. So that's what user stories are and what our personas are. So let's look at some real-world examples that we came up with. So first is, as an FTE engineer, I want to be able to commit and deploy code without being on VPN, so I don't need to wait for VPN to connect every morning. So VPNs are a real source of user frustration and friction. This isn't something you can work around, right? You either connect to VPN every morning or you ain't shipping code. So here's another example. Contingent workers face some of the same challenges as full-time employees, but they have other different ones too. Now, one is that they're usually onboard and offboard in a much shorter time period than full-time employees. So getting them access to the resources they need to do their job on their first day of work without someone going there and clicking share 5,000 times is a real issue. So when you're writing your user stories, you may find that you're writing down things that already work great and you can't really think of ways to improve them. That's fantastic as well. You should still write them down, because we need to make sure any of the controls we implement later on don't break any workflows for our users. So once we had our user stories written down, we're able to pull out our user pain points. We split them across the sections of device, identity, situational, and network. We then split them again into the 3 parts of their user journey. So we've got onboarding. So they're going to be pain points relating to when they're onboarding to the company or starting a new project, something like that. Then we've got thriving. They're the pain points that happen again and again and again. And offboarding, obviously, the ones when they're either leaving the company or coming off a project. So far, we've been looking at the strategy from a user perspective. And that's the right order, in my opinion. But Zero Trust is not just about making access easier for people. It is about improving our security posture. So let's have a look at things from the IT and security end. So whether you know it or not, you are probably doing a lot of Zero Trust stuff already. Or you may already have tools that, if they're configured correctly, could be used as part of your Zero Trust strategy. Write them all down. What do they do? Who owns them? Try and categorize them into groups that make sense to you as well. You know, it might be things like device management or identity. So the things you're writing down will likely include your MDM, your identity provider, your MFA tool if that's separate, your VPN, your security software, things that issue certificates, asset inventory, those kind of things. Write down absolutely everything you can think of that is related to the device, the user, how the user accesses resources, and how you assess the state of the device's security. So, from a security perspective, what are you trying to achieve here? So here's some ideas for goals. Hopefully you'll have more than 3. But as a kickoff, you might want to block access to your IDP from untrusted devices. So ensure only devices you have decided are in a good state can access your services. Maybe you would like user-facing context reporting to allow users to self-remediate their issues. Because when you start making access decisions based on device and user contexts, your users are much more likely to be blocked. So you may want to build or buy a tool that allows users to know what's wrong with their context and what they could do to fix it. Continuously authorize access to services and data. So one of the core features of Zero Trust is to continuously assess the user and device and context against your policy. Not only at authentication time, but regularly throughout their session, and ideally with every request they make. So chances are, you've got some pretty smart people in this room to talk about this. So maybe spend some time talking about ideas that you don't plan on tackling in your initial rollout. Nor, they might not even be possible with today's technology. But you still write them down, because they may form the basis of future projects. Here's some examples we came up with. Use AI to automatically share documents with a user when they're starting a project, and then unshare them when they're finished. Use AI to analyze user behavior, like are they doing anything weird? Maybe self-service identity verification for doing password and MFA resets. And yes, there was lots of AI there because ChatGPT was new hotness when we all got in the room. We're original. All right. So measuring success is important for any project, right? How are you going to know when you're done? You could spend your life endlessly tweaking all the buttons to make things a little bit more zero-trusty. So fortunately, CISA, who are the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, they have 2 securities in their name, so they must be really good, has published their Zero Trust Maturity Model. So what is a maturity model, I hear you cry? Thank you. All right. All right, so you start with a series of pillars. The CISA model has these pillars. They're a pretty good starting point, but you might have other pillars that you care about in your org. So you are then going to gauge your level of maturity for each of these pillars, from traditional through to initial, advanced, and then finally to optimal. So generally, these pillars are going to be too broad to gauge any real progress. So then you're going to split each one into smaller sub-pillars. For example, with identity, you might split it into things like authentication, identity stores, access management, those sort of things. So we're going to take a look at CISA's maturity model for authentication as an example. All right, I'll give you a second to read that, because I know it's fascinating. All right. So this illustrates how when you move through the maturity levels, you incrementally improve your situation. So when we decided on our own maturity model, we started with the CISA one, and then we went through and made changes to reflect what we care about, where we are today, and where we want to get to. Some of the items, we were already advanced or optimal according to CISA. So we were able to push ourselves to be even better. But for some of them, we were definitely at traditional. So we had some work to do. The important thing here is to make sure you set appropriate goals for your organization. Because unless you're a US government agency, you are almost certainly not going to care about all the things that CISA lists. So we've listed our current tools and capabilities. We know what we're trying to achieve and how we're even going to measure success. And we even thought about some things that we would like to do at some point in the future. So let's identify our current gaps. Where do our current tools and solutions fall short? When you've listed your current gaps, you should go through and, at a very high level, either identify things you have planned already that would solve these problems, or outline what it would take to solve that gap. If it's a project that's already planned, when are you going to do it? If it's a new project, when might you do it? So let's have a look at a few projects you might want to consider in your ZT strategy. I just said Z. And what's it? Something went wrong with the slides? Okay. Here's where I need to start talking about where to go drinking somewhere else. Here we go. All right, cool. All right, so many popular MDMs offer an integration with your IDP for what they call device posture. But really, most of them do a pretty poor job. So take some time to think about what constitutes a healthy device in your environment. It might include the last time the device communicates with your MDM, checking that your security tools are running, making sure the device is running the latest version of macOS. There are loads of signals that you might want to consider. And honestly, even just thinking about what it means to be a healthy, trusty device in your environment is likely going to be a project, let alone building out all the pipelines to bring all of these data sources into whatever you're using for checking device posture and gating access. So what was unthinkable a few years ago is now looking pretty realistic after we worked from home for 3 years. So maybe write something down about how just having a credential and being sat in an office shouldn't give you any special access. Like maybe you need to assess the device posture in the context the requests are made in as well. So you'll probably need to think of what tool or service is going to act as your policy decision point, or PDP. This is often the point where the combination of user, device, and context are compared against your policy, and it will make the decision as to whether the access request is going to be granted or not. this is where all your data pipelines that send signals about the device are going to end up. So it's really important that you spend some time thinking about this. And it's all well and good validating the device posture when the user logs in for the first time in the morning. But one of the cornerstones of Zero Trust is continually assessing the device, the user, and the context, and making continual authorization decisions based upon your policy. So ideally, it's going to be for every request, but you probably want to at least think about a mechanism to make these decisions just more regularly than just a login. So if you're doing things like enforcing use of security keys or passkeys, or switching to passwordless, you'll need pretty robust ways to verify the user's identity if they lose their device or they, for some reason, don't have access to the devices anymore. So this is a tough problem today when you have people who may have never met any of their coworkers in real life. And it's only going to get harder with things like deepfakes. All right, so this one's really important. If the team that needs to solve the issue or be involved in the solution isn't in the room with you right now, like you don't talk about it anymore. Identify who needs to be involved and then put it to one side until you talk to that team. Like, let's take improving identity verification, for example. It's likely that your help desk is going to be involved in taking those calls, right? So they're going to be major stakeholders in any solution, so absolutely must be involved in any project brainstorming. So here's another example of a project where you'd need to have other stakeholders in the room for. So as client engineers, you might not be responsible for all the services that run in your data center or your cloud of choice. So strongly authenticating service-to-service communication is an important step in a Zero Trust roadmap, but it's not one we can take without the owners being involved, who in my case would be my systems engineering team. So indeed, we are halfway through our planning session. So we have identified what we think our users want to do. We have identified what we have, what we want to achieve, and what our gaps are. So it's time to wrap this up into a digestible format. You'll probably have a ton of documents at this point. So let's make something we can share with the world, like from leadership to our partner teams, and maybe even your end users. So the goal of the 4-pager is to provide the right level of information to every level of your organization. Your CEO could read the first page and have a good idea of why we're doing this. Engineers can read the whole thing and have a good overview of the entire strategy. So we, as engineers, know why we want to do Zero Trust. But we need a 4-sentence statement on what problem we are trying to solve. So it's critical that everyone on the project can deliver an elevator pitch. So imagine you're in an elevator with your CEO, and they turn around to you and say, Graham, why on earth are you working on Zero Trust? So you should be able to tell them during the elevator ride. So this one's ours. I'm going to break my rules about reading slides, so here we go. Workers need a frictionless and secure way to access the resources they need. Our vision is a well-managed approach to access that protects Airbnb's assets and is a great experience for our users who are Airbnb's workforce. Our goal is to provide the right level of access to the right identity on the right device with the right context. So this is our elevator pitch, and we've solved the CEO problem. Now we're going to move down one level to our executives. Like, why are we doing this, right? For that audience, we are focusing on the business case. Will this save time or money? If users are able to access resources without needing to connect to a VPN, for example, you're going to save time. So maybe spend some time researching how long do your users actually take to authenticate to VPN every day. And maybe if VPN has less use cases, you might be able to reduce your license count for your VPN. So these sort of things are important to include in addition to the security improvements that you're going to bring. So let's take it a little bit lower. What are we actually trying to do here? This should be an incredibly high-level overview of what you're going to do. So we focus on 3 pillars in our document. We focus on improving user experience, improving security and reducing risk, and improving governance and oversight around how our data is used. Yours might be similar, they might be different. Each organization has its own culture. So we've largely answered the why are we doing this question at this point. Now we're going to answer the who. Who needs to be involved? Who will be impacted by this project? So describe your primary groups of customers. Again, ours are full-time employees, contractors, customer support agents, and robots. you could take this opportunity to highlight one of their top 2 pain points as well if you wanted. So here, we're going to summarize our user journeys. Like, you're not going to be going into tons of detail here, right? You're trying to keep this to 4 pages. But it's to give your stakeholders a sense of where your users are right now and what they're doing. So as with all these sections, like, you can link out to more detailed documents if you want to. So you don't need to put pages and pages in here. So I believe that solving user problems is one of the most important parts of our job. And as such, highlighting the problems that we are going to solve for our customers is a vital part of your 4-pager. We split ours out by mood. Like, how annoying are these problems that we're going to solve? So obviously, we didn't have anything in amazing experience yet. That's where we're going. But we could split them out by slightly annoying. Maybe their name is spelt wrong when they're on board, or their security key is broken. And by like really, really annoying or bad, like an OS update goes wrong and completely bricks their laptop or something like that. So let's summarize our strategy. Like for us, it was a table that summarized the maturity model and our capability mapping document. This outlined everything we wanted to achieve. We aligned it with how each of these things were going to improve our security posture and, more importantly, improve the user experience. So when are you going to do this? Like, you're handing out to the partner team, right? They need to know when they need to help you. So when you identify your projects, you took a somewhat wild-ass guess about when you're going to do things. Like, let's put them in a timeline. Link out to further resources, like the docs from your working session, your Jira dashboards, project pages, metrics dashboards. How are you going to measure success? Like, you might not have much here yet. Okay, we're just starting. But keep adding to this as you go. This will let your stakeholders stay informed about what's happening. All right, so that is how I think you should think about planning your zero trust strategy. So I didn't come up with this alone. I was merely a contributor to this process. But even the act of planning out how we were going to plan this thing took us weeks and weeks. So before we close out, let's have a quick recap. Zero Trust is not just a product you can buy. Hooking a conditional access product into your MDM is not going to get you to a good place all by itself. Yes, it might be better than what you have today, but it's not exactly a strategy. Keep your users in the front of your mind. Because if what you are providing is not better than what they have today, they're just going to work around it. And make sure everyone on the project can describe accurately and succinctly what you're trying to achieve. And finally, Zero Trust is a journey that impacts everyone in an organization, not just your security teams. Security cannot come up with this on their own. Subject matter experts from every area in IT and beyond need to be involved. All right, so that's it. You can find me at these places. I have a rarely updated website. I very occasionally post on Mastodon, and you can email me my very cryptic and hard-to-guess email address. And if you found this talk useful in any way, please consider donating to Movember Foundation and help save some of the lives the people you might very well be sitting next to right now. And I'll say something silly now. We can take some questions.
Thank you, Graham. So, questions over here. We got Mr. Tom Bridge.
I thought it was really interesting that you guys decided to put a gate up around your IDP and not have the IDP make its own gate. What was I mean, you're essentially saying that there's an external source of policy and device management that's required before you can even talk to the IDP, instead of either turning on something at the IDP itself? I mean, what was the thought process behind that specific piece? Sorry, I'm an IDP, I ask these questions.
Sorry, I was processing that in my head. That's not kind of how we do it, but the IDP doesn't always know everything about the device, right? And when I touched on, when we were planning this all out and we realized we want to only allow access to managed devices. And then we sat down and go, hell's a managed device? Like, if I asked person over there what's a managed device, they'll have one answer. You over there will have another one. And for us, it means something completely different to all of you, I expect. So no single tool can ever know everything that's important to you. And honestly, most of the commercial products, they'll have integrations to like the major EDRs and things like that, right? Maybe you use them, maybe you don't. Maybe their integration is like, is it installed? Great, you know, because you can't turn off a system extension, can you? That's impossible. So where was I going with this? Identity is just one part of it, right? So our identity provider, yeah, that's important, but it's not the whole story. Like, honestly, I think the most important part is like the device health and the context. Like, the identity is a pretty solved problem at this point. I mean, we've had directories for, you know, before I was born. Did I answer the question? That felt very long-winded and rambly, sorry. Anyone else?
Come on, one more, one more, one more.
So I had a bet with someone that I only got one question. So I've now lost my bet. At the back.
Wait, you're gonna get a mic.
Hi, Graham.
Hello?
Do y'all have a BYO program? And does some of this apply to that potential program? And if you don't, that's an easy question to answer.
Yes, we do have a Bring Our Own Disaster program. And yes, you know, when I said like device trust, isn't just trusted, managed, approved devices. It could be anything, and everything has a level of trust. I might trust those devices less than I trust a corporately owned device that I have full control over, but we still trust it to some extent. So we allow it access to some of our data.
Well, looks like we're good. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, everybody.